Let's imagine you've written the next American classic and you find yourself in an elevator with a world-class agent and an all-star editor. What do? You could pitch your novel with an expertly crafted logline, or you could entice them with the perfect comparisons. Comps. My novel is this bestseller meets this critically acclaimed book. So how do you find comps? What makes for a good one? In this video, I'll share advice from the pros and show you how I found my own. So what are comps? Star Werdeman breaks this down in an excellent article that I'll link below. Star writes, comps stand for comparable titles, books that might be comparable to your own. Why are comps so important to agents and publishers? Star continues, they will have an easier time understanding what your book is like or who it's for if a comparison can be made. It also shows that you know something about the current marketplace and how your book fits in it. If that's the case, what makes for a good comp? Books published within the last 2 to 3 years, ideally by a debut author, that are similar in plot or tone. Read it before you use it as a comp. You can use other media like TV, film, or podcasts as comps, but to reinforce the earlier point about understanding the marketplace, I would pair a good book comp with something else. 2 TV shows doesn't make a lot of sense. Bestsellers are fine, but don't use any books that have become phenomenons. Janet Reed also recommends to avoid books that have been adapted into film and authors with 20+ bestsellers. How do you use comps? The classic phrase is, my book is X meets Y. Janet Reed recommends, title will appeal to readers of blank, or title evokes the story of blank. I encourage you to be far more specific about similarities like sharing multiple points of view, stylistic choices, or structure. Like I did in my original query letter with Lifeship Traders and Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. Those comparisons are apt. The issue is in how dated those titles are. Before we discuss how to find comps, it's time for an emotional check-in. Crazy cat. Tamby.
Oh, baby. What a good baby.
How am I feeling? Focused and rededicated. Writing a book is emotionally draining, and starting the querying process is doubly so. I've talked about feeling vulnerable, and I think that's perfectly natural. So is losing perspective. In October, I was very pleased with the state of my manuscript, and was exhausted by writing and editing it. Now that I've had some space, I want to give it another pass of polish. I'm confident that I've regained the ability to be more objective. The same is true with the querying process. I'm still waiting on 5 replies, but have accepted that it's unlikely I'll have an opportunity with them. But that's okay. I've learned a lot, and I still have a huge list of agents to query. Every year, between 500,000 and 1 million books are traditionally published. So how do you sort through the noise and find good comps? Reading constantly is a good start, but if you're like me, you're not necessarily driven to following market trends. So how can you take a more targeted approach? Star Werdeman recommends doing some groundwork by asking librarians, other writers, beta readers, and booksellers at independent bookstores. In terms of online research, Star suggests Goodreads and Amazon by researching the best of in your genre for the last 3 years, debut books of the past 3 years, as well as the websites Book Browse and Literature Map. Here's what Literature Map looks like. I put in Robin Hobb. A lot of these names are familiar, but some aren't, so I can look up authors I don't recognize and do some more research. Star mentioned that she spent 2 months finding the right comps, which I assume included reading, but that helps illustrate what a task this can be. Thank you for the great article, Star. If you're like me and your book is genre blending, what do you do when you can't find suitable comps? Woolly Bear's response on AbsoluteRight.com is a succinct answer. The quickest way to find comps is to tell communities like this about your book and ask what comps people might recommend you look at. The best way is to read recent releases, read the blurb and opening pages on Look Inside, then narrow down to a few titles. The most strategic way is to look at the books agents have sold. If you have a voice or style similar to something they've sold, then they have a good idea what editors to pitch to. My personal rejections come from agents who have sold books similar to the style of my own. They actually took the time to think in their rejections. The clever way to handle this problem is to select a feature of multiple books, the stakes of X and the narrative style of Y with the kind of protagonist seen in Z. That sort of thing. You can squeak by with bad fit comps if you identify the element that is a good fit. That advice applies for genre blending books, like mine. Maybe I won't find the perfect match, but if I find something similar, I can use that as a good comp. Zoe used that format to pitch her book, Gear Breakers, as Pacific Rim meets Cinder meets Mockingjay. Online communities can be a huge help, but make sure to follow their rules. Pub Tips on Reddit is very strict that comp requests can only occur during query letter reviews, and as I mentioned in a prior video, They also have strict requirements for query letters. I had success finding subforums for my genre on Reddit, fantasy and fantasy writers. Again, be sure to adhere to the rules. I had an initial post deleted because I opened with, "I've been trying to find," instead of the mandated, "I have tried to find." If you post asking for help in these communities, be as specific as possible and make sure to check whether another user has asked the same question recently. All that said, the community response was great. I got a list of relevant books to read and what sounds like a near perfect comp, a multi-POV fantasy book by a debut author that is also set in a historical reimagining of Ireland, Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. In A Stroke of Fate, Haruki Murakami has released a new book very much in the style of Hard-Boiled Wonderland called The City and Its Uncertain Walls. He's written 15 novels and 6 collections of short stories, so I think he might just squeak under Janet Reed's advice to avoid authors with 20-plus bestsellers. Now I have roughly 1,100 pages to read between those 2 books before I can use them as comps. I'm looking forward to it. Next video, we'll put together everything we've learned and submit to some agents. But before we go, something about Tamby. Recently I had to get her teeth cleaned, and she's 14. She may look tiny and little, but she's an old lady, and it was scary to put her under anesthesia. Luckily, everything worked out perfectly. She didn't need any extractions, they cleaned up her teeth, she got a certificate for bravest patient, and they gave her a cute little ribbon.